Monrovia is a city in turmoil. Thousands of people surge through the streets seeking safety. In recent days, the city has suffered two major onslaughts. Armed men have overrun villages and camps outside Monrovia. Inside the city, private homes are looted, fuel stores pillaged. Gun-toting gangsters mix indiscriminately with civilians who are terrified of the threatened violence. It's a city in chaos. As the presidential cavalcade moves through the streets, the mood amongst the people is overwhelming. But while the crowds chant for peace, ceasefire after ceasefire is broken, and the civilians in this devastated town are paying a mortal toll. Hundreds of wounded are being treated at the JFK ICRC Surgical Trauma Center. It's the only major hospital in the capital that's kept running throughout the recent weeks of fighting. Teams of ICRC surgeons, expert in treating the terrible wounds of war, operate day and night on soldiers and civilians alike. During lulls in the fighting, more wounded are brought in from outside the city. Many are children with terrible bullet wounds. The hospital is stretched to the limit.
We have been operating on a limited staff, and whenever there is an upsurge in the crisis, of course we had to bring in a large number of volunteers, so we have a problem of staff sometimes when there is, a chaotic situation going on. And also we have problem with materials. Of course, ICRC has been supplying all of our basic materials, talking about drugs and service support materials. But sometimes when there is an influx of patients, like in the case of the past 2 weeks fighting, then of course we sometimes go down the materials.
Today there are 205 inpatients, but the hospital has had to deal with up to 500 at a time, while more wounded queue to be seen. At Robertsfield Airport, just outside the city, an aircraft arrives from Geneva bearing 12 tons of medical supplies, plus a surgeon to relieve the exhausted residents of JFK.
Well, it's a little bit better since yesterday, but of course there are still a lot of wounded, and it's also why we decided to have this charter very quickly, because the medical supply was getting very low. And we had so many wounded that just to respond to the emergency that we had to charter very quickly this plane.
Monrovia is full to bursting. Over 200,000 people have flooded into the city, added to the million residents. They take shelter wherever they can, in public buildings and schools, here in an old Masonic temple. At Boatswain High School, people camp out on the floor of the hall. Conditions are appalling, but it seems that anything is better than risking the fighting on the outskirts of the city. The ICRC distributes food and blankets, but it's impossible to satisfy all the needs here. Many of these people were living in camps for the displaced when they were overrun by armed fighters, like Massa Serlov, who fled from Blamacy camp.
Oh, no clothes, I see my hair, open more. No food, no nothing. We get here on the ground. You see the thing what this all the children can eat. Some of the children lost from clay. I will get 7 children, 2 children lost. I don't know where they are, 2 boys.
The Samuel K. Doe Stadium, south of the city, is Liberia's national sports stadium. Today, it's turned into a refuge for the homeless. Around 150,000 people are taking shelter here, the largest gathering of displaced people in the city. Food, water, blankets and cookware are being given out by the ICRC. But at this stage there's great uncertainty about how long people will stay here, how long they will need this kind of help. In such conditions, there are serious concerns about the spread of disease. Children are especially vulnerable. Diarrhea and even cholera are on the increase. Families sleep rough, taking shelter where they can, cooking, eating and sleeping under the stadium seating. Many of the people sheltering in Monrovia have had to flee from camps like this one as the front line moves. Here in Blamacy camp, the ICRC's health post has just reopened, having closed for a week when armed men broke in.
After the incident, we reopened the clinic on the 17th, which was on Tuesday. We saw about 110 patients. Most of the cases seen here are malaria, diarrhea, acute respiratory tract infection, and malnutrition.
Living in camps like this for months and even years, it's hard to remember a time when conflict and insecurity haven't dominated daily life. Children are particularly at risk in the chaos of flight. Family groups often get split up. Children can be lost, like this little girl. Nine-year-old Sando is traumatized by what happened, but she trusts Albert, a Red Cross worker, who tells her story.
Sando, are you able to explain to the people how you got missing?
Sando had already fled once from fighting, but when militia came into Blamacy camp, looting and terrorizing, there was no choice but to flee again. As she walked towards the city, she lost sight of her parents in the crowd and found herself alone. She was eventually brought to the ICRC. Today, she's being taken to the centre where her grandmother and uncle have been located. The whole business is overwhelming. Tracking down individuals in the teeming city is painstaking.
We create lists, and if necessary we take also the pictures of the children, and then we put these lists in all the places where you have displaced people. Or sometimes we do radio announcements, or we go into the communities and ask where the parents could be.
Sando's ordeal is over. But the great tragedy is that so many children like her have grown up knowing nothing but conflict all their lives. Scenes today echo events played out over a decade ago when the ICRC started its work in Liberia. For many Liberians stuck in makeshift shelters, the agony goes on. Today on the streets of Monrovia there is anger and frustration. Women outside the American embassy appeal for assistance from the wider world. They're desperate to call a halt to the violence. The people call for peace, but at this moment there's widespread fear that once the current ceasefire comes to an end, the violent struggle in Monrovia will start all over again.